Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for another Q-Tips session. My name is Elizabeth Miller. I'm CEO at Quaint Business Solutions. Quaint is an SAP Business One provider who values excellence in customer service, as well as knowledge of the B1 application. And part of what we like to do here at Quaint is ensure we're always showcasing great features within the B1 application and helping to empower our clients and others to use the system to its fullest. Today, we have our very own Travis Thurston here to walk us through SAP out-of-the-box manufacturing. So thank you, Travis. Whenever you're ready, I'll let you take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you, Liz. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you everybody for joining. So let's go ahead and jump into the information here. So on today's agenda, we're going to be covering things like the item master, resources, routing stages, our BOM setups, and then production orders. All of these play a part into the out-of-box manufacturing. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that we can jump into in this, so I'm going to kind of keep it at a high level to some degree, but try to hit the main points that matter when using out-of-the-box manufacturing. So when we look at the item master, when you are creating an item to be used in the production process, it needs to always be marked as an inventory item first and foremost for it to be considered, because it has to have something to either release or create in the production process. Then also on the production or on the item master itself, on the production data tab, you have the ability to define a few other things related to the production process, whether it should be a backflush or manual issue method. Typically, this is more important when you're dealing with like serial batch valuation methods, and also the BOM types related to this particular item. So you can define if there should be a standard cost for reporting purposes related to that production, as well as if you want to include it in a standard cost roll-up if you're using that valuation method within your SAP Business One setup. Then, jumping into resources, this is a way for you to actually capture costs in SAP related to non-inventory related costing. So with the item master, it's physical goods that you're going to be using in the production process. And here on the resource, this is where we're looking at machine time or labor or other types of costs that you want to include in the production value. So then that way you can better account for the cost of what it takes to create a part within SAP. So on your resources, you can define the resource type, the resource group, which is also customizable. So even though there's an out-of-the-box resources group, you can also kind of create your own, which allows you to also to define what these standard costs are supposed to be. You can define if it's going to be a backflush method versus a manual method, and you can also link it to, excuse me, a purchased item. And when you do a create link on the purchase item, it actually creates a purchase only item in your item master that's linked to this resource. That becomes part of the capacity planning, which I'm not going to jump into really in depth here, but it is something that SAP can support. And that's what that kind of refers to. In your standard cost setups, you have up to 10 different standard costs that you can define per resource. So if there's multiple types of costs that you're trying to capture with that resource, you can define them here. And then this also ties into our GL account determination for resources. So you have a couple different options on setting up your resource GL determination. You can do a more simplified version, which is where you set it so every resource is always going to hit those particular GL accounts for those particular standard costs that you have defined, or you can do an advanced determination for your GL account determination. I will say that the difference here on the advanced in resources is that it doesn't require that you have to have advanced GL determination turned on for your overall chart of accounts. It's completely separate. So you can have a standard chart of accounts that is not an advanced GL determination and still use advanced GL determinations within your resources. And to kind of give you an example of that, if we were to go to our GL determinations here, if we go to our general, or I'm sorry, not authorizations, went to the wrong thing. Apologize. GL account determinations. One of the things you do want to set up is the resources or determination criteria, right, for your resources. So if you want to determine it by group, code, warehouse code, federal tax ID, etc., you can do those sorts of things here. Then if I were to go into my advanced tab, I have the ability to then come in and define this more specifically per resource. So even though I don't have it set up here, I could come in, choose a specific resource if I had a code, and say I wanted my assembly machine to be something that I'm specifically working on, and I only want it to be for my West Coast warehouse, for example. I can then set up my standard cost expenses for each of those different standard costs related to this particular resource here. So lots of customization in that section of the production. So once you have your item master and your resources defined, one of the other things that we can do is also define routing stages. So routing stages are a custom definition within production, and in the out-of-the-box method, it really is more for visualization of how you want things to be done within your production process. And when using things like a manual issue method, it allows you to also go through and more greatly control when you're putting costs into WIP or when you're doing a certain process. This is beneficial when you are wanting to really control the flow of how the production is going. This is also useful when working with some add-ons. In the BOM setup, this is where you're going to define the template of what you're going to use in that production process. So there are different types of BOMs. The one that we're going to work with specifically here is production, because sales template and assembly BOMs are used in the sales and purchasing process, not so much in the actual production process. So when doing a production BOM, you can define your routing stages, items to be consumed as components, and resources for additional costs to be used at that time. You'll notice that it gives you an estimate of prices related to those based on the price list that you have selected on the BOM. You can also define if it should be a backflush versus a manual issue method related to that production process. And you can kind of get a sense of what the overall cost of making the part from those components and resources should be. And again, this is just for reporting. So this does not define the actual cost. That happens during the actual production process. This is everything in this is essentially just a viewport into what could I expect to pay to make this part, and what do I typically want to use in this. This is a little dynamic, and it is still configurable in the production process itself. Before I jump into the production order, I know I kind of covered a good bit of information. Does anybody have a question about what we looked over so far? Okay, so I will jump into the next slide here. So on the production order, this is where the magic in SAP really happens. So this is where you're physically going to make a part, physically remove any inventory, and add your costing based on how your items are set up. You know, your valuation method, whether it's standard, moving average, FIFO, any of that. So it's a transactional document. So this will actually work with goods issues, goods receipts, and create journal entries. And when you create a production order, it's essentially going to use the BOM that you have set up, but then you can manually adjust or add or subtract any rows in the production order itself uh, when doing this process so that it becomes dynamic and movable for your needs. You can also link this to sales orders or generate this off of sales orders if you have some, production to order type of processes. And one of the questions that we get oftentimes is what's the difference between manual and what's the difference between backflush on an issue method? Does it really matter? Why should we care about this? Excuse me. So with a manual method, what you're doing is you're manually issuing into your WIP process the goods or resources costs that you want at that point in time before you receive anything from production. So this is used with batch and serial methods primarily because you have to select a serial number or a batch number related to that inventory process. And it's also really good when using routing stages to control when your inventory is moving or when the production process is moving through the production. So it gives you a lot more control over the overall process and timing of the production order. With a backflush method, this will automatically create an issue to production when you do a receipt from production. So this obviously creates less steps, but you can't use it with serial or batch managed inventory. You have to use manual with those particular ones because backflush is just automatically doing those processes. And so with backflush, you could potentially run into an issue if you didn't want something to be issued at the time you do a receipt of production. Just something to keep in mind when choosing those. So to kind of give you an example of how that would work, if we go to our production module and we open up a production order, here's one that I created not too long ago. And you can see what we have here, where we have the part that we put in. So this is what we're going to create. Here's our different routing stages. And I have a few different things that are set up as manual and backflush processes. So I'm actually going to go ahead and just adjust these to backflush or for manual in these instances. And I'm going to let these other ones backflush out. So when you go to do a issue of components, when you have manual methods, if you right click to go to your menu on the production order and issue components, you can see you have different options of what you can select during that. You can choose a particular routing sequence that you want to issue, or you can pick a particular routing stage depending upon which one you have set up. You can also choose if you want to do items and resources, items only, or resources only. And you can also do all of the open quantities, or you can do a specific quantity amount. So a lot of customization in the process of what you're releasing in the process, as well as here you can specify specific items, resources, and warehouses, depending on how granular you want to go. So now if I come in, let's say I wanted to issue my routing stage 2, and I say, okay. You'll notice on this one that I'm not able to bring anything in. I apologize for that. That was due to something I had set up on that. Let's go to one here that I have actually already processed, probably because I didn't have the inventory on hand. So once you go through and you manually issue a production, this is what you'll see typically. You'll see all the parts that you're issuing, and it does the issue of production on its own. All of this goes back to the costing that you're putting into WIP. And then for anything that you do as a receipt of production, when it creates the receipt of production here, you'll notice it's got this arrow that's coming down to this issue of production here because I had one method that was backflush on my resource. So this got created at the time that I did this receipt of production. So that's an example of how those two processes work together. Then when you're completing a production order, you can also see how your costing affected the costing of that part based on your valuation method for the item. So if it's a standard cost, you would probably see some more variance posting here if there was any variance related to it. If it's a value, a moving average or a FIFO or a serial batch managed method, you'll see what the total costs were for your item component costs and resource component costs going into the full product cost. If you had any additional costs, which is where you add additional quantities or items at the time of production, or if you're doing a byproduct, which is where you're returning some inventory to stock, so to say, those costs would then affect this actual product cost at that point in time and take everything out of your WIP accounts and zero that out and move everything back into your inventory asset accounts. So to also demonstrate what that looks like here in real time, on your summary tab, we can look at our item component costs. If you drill down into those, you can see what is making up those inventory component costs. So in this case, all of these costs are made up of the physical inventory items that I had used in this production process. The resource cost is specific to that one resource that I had defined. And you can see here the issue of production related to that. And then if you need to drill down into that for your journal entries, you obviously have that ability. Then the two numbers combined, when I created or two costs rather combined, when I created my 200 units, got associated to the 200 units I completed here on this receipt of production, and we can see what the total cost of those units was when we completed that production. And so here it gives you the breakdown of that information. If there was variance amounts, you can drill down into here to see how the variance breakdown worked in SAP related to that. And when you close your production order, you also get a closing journal entry remark, and you can see if there was any associated costs or changes in the production process from the close of production as well. This can also sometimes happen if you have variance amounts that are left over, and when you close this, it's then moving it from your WIP into your COGS account or into an inventory account, or however you have your GL account determination set up. And that is the out-of-the-box manufacturing process. I'll turn it back over to Liz.
Does anybody have any questions or anything that you'd like to see in more detail? We're happy to dive further in if anybody has questions on specific areas.
Liz, this is Vinita. I don't have any questions, but I appreciate you guys doing this. I am new into this SAP world, so this was very beneficial for me. Just one question. Are you going to be sharing this deck with us?
Yes, we can absolutely do that. We also always publish our videos on our YouTube channel, Vinita, and we have lots of other great resources and videos there that may be useful to you as well.
Okay, awesome. And how frequently are these webinars done?
We do webinars once a month. Sometimes they are Q-tips like this, which feature resources inside of B1, or other times we feature other add-ons or products that are complementary to Business One as well. But we do one each month.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Travis, can you maybe show if there's any type of production reporting within Business One?
Sure. So there are some production reports directly under the production module. You have if you're doing standard cost management, the ability to update what your standards are done through your standard cost roll-up, as well as a bill of materials report and an open items list. So not a lot of real in-depth out-of-the-box reporting necessarily. Bill of materials report just kind of allows you to put in an item. So let's choose this one, for example. And what it will return is a breakdown of the different items that make up that particular bill of material, and kind of shows you the hierarchy of how all of those fit together. With your open items list, this one is useful in trying to determine what you have in a plan status versus a release status for production, so you can come in and filter on planned or released. Let's say if I was doing this, you can also come in here and automatically change it to a different status. So if you know something needed to be closed off or canceled, you could do that in bulk in this particular option. So if I go to planned, for example, and say I have, these ones that I want to change to released so that I can start production, I'll just do this in bulk and say, yep, I'm going to change these to released. It goes through, and now when I check my released, I can see all of those production orders there in the release status. And also, you do have to have a production order in a released status to be able to do an issue of production or a report of completion. Plan just means that you're planning to do the production order. Released means that you're actively going to start working on that production order.
That was actually really helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions? I know we went over a lot of material today and basically on a high level. So if you have anything that you prefer to see maybe in more detail, feel free to reach out to us directly. We may choose it to do another in-depth webinar on, or we'd be happy to talk to you one-on-one about your specific questions and go in depth from there. As always, remember that to follow us on LinkedIn and check our email announcements if you're a current client of Quaint. And we also have amazing resources and goodies and takeaways and things like that out on our resource page on our website, as well as what we already mentioned, that we also have our YouTube channel. So feel free to subscribe to that and be up to date on the latest and greatest videos that we publish throughout the year. Thank you for your time today, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day.